Very interesting comparison. Here I have the iPhone 16 against the Samsung Galaxy S24. The question, of course, is which one is better? As always, let's begin by talking about the exterior design, which, as you can see, is relatively similar between the two phones. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are not identical. Each one has its own style and its own identity, but they share a lot of design elements. They both have matte glass on the back. They both have matte aluminum sides that are also flat. They both have more or less the same size. There's only two tiny differences, being that the S24 has 3 cameras and the iPhone has 2, and also that the iPhone has a tiny camera module and the S24 is a little bit more minimalistic without any camera module at all. I feel like it is impossible to declare a winner in this case because, as I said, they are very, very similar. They share a lot of design elements. And also, this has always been a very subjective point. Some people have always liked the iPhone style better. Some other people have always liked the Sony Xperia style, the Samsung style, the LG, the Google Pixel. Each lineup of phones has always had its own identity. And I feel like it comes down to the person to determine which one they find more attractive. Now, what is a little bit more different, so to say, on both phones is the display. Samsung, and I am going to say it right away, has a better display because it has 120 Hertz as opposed to 60 on the iPhone, because as you can see, it has slightly slimmer bezels all around the phone. They both have, by the way, symmetrical bezels. Also, because Samsung, I cannot show you here because I'm indoors, but Samsung has slightly better brightness, going up to 2600 nits as opposed to the 2000 nits on the iPhone. And last but not least, as you can see, Samsung has a smaller notch, which is difficult to see because of the wallpaper that I have here, but yeah, it is much smaller than the notch on the iPhone 16. Well, the dynamic island, as Apple calls it. So yeah, Samsung has a better display. All of the differences that I just showed you have been Samsung advantages. But I don't want you to think that the iPhone has a bad display. I mean, when it comes to the panel quality, the viewing angles and the way they look, the color calibration, the color science of the two displays, they are both really, really good. I mean, Apple has been really, really good for the past couple years when it comes to calibrating displays, which is one of the most important aspects when it comes to how the display ends up looking and representing colors. But of course, it still has some very noticeable flaws, especially the 60 Hertz that I feel like are just unforgivable at this point in almost 2025. I mean, every other, not even flagship, every other Android phone that's not $100 has 120 Hertz. So because the iPhone doesn't have it, I feel like it is at a major disadvantage against the Samsung, even if you don't notice, because I feel like that's the main argument a lot of people make is that they don't notice the difference. But when you're spending so much money on a phone, you just want that extra little bit of niceness, of premium, even if it's not that noticeable. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to tell you earlier, you have links for both of these phones on Amazon down below in the description with incredible prices. I found the best price for the iPhone, the best price for the S24, just in case at the end of the video you want to buy them or take a look. Now, that being said, another very important aspect to compare between these two phones are the internal components. In this case, the iPhone has the new A18 processor, which is one of the fastest mobile processors on the planet. I think it is only behind the A18 Pro, also from Apple. And the S24 has the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 if you're lucky to live in the US or Canada, and it has the Exynos 2400, which is noticeably worse if you live anywhere else on the planet, meaning UK, Europe, Africa, Asia, anywhere else, you're gonna get a noticeably worse processor. I live in Spain, so I get the crappy Exynos. And don't get me wrong, when it comes to the way they feel when navigating the system and opening apps, they are both incredibly fast and incredibly similar. But as you can see, there is a very noticeable difference in the Geekbench CPU test. It is almost 100% better in the single-core score, and it is a good chunk better in the multi-core score. Now, as I said, this is not something you will notice today. Both of these phones have spare performance, so you won't notice the extra power on the iPhone 16. But in 5 to 6 years, when neither of these phones have spare performance because operative systems have become much more demanding and apps have become much more demanding, then you probably will notice the iPhone 16 is a little bit faster than the S24 because it has a better processor. Now, when it comes to battery life and longevity, I have not noticed a major difference between the two. I think last year the S24 was better than the iPhone 15, like a little bit better. But this year, Apple has improved the batteries on all their new iPhone 16s, including the normal 16, so they probably are about the same. Now, something I always say in all my videos is that when you see battery comparisons on YouTube, the results are going to heavily depend on the apps that you see on that test. Sometimes phones are more optimized for heavy-duty applications. Some other times they are more optimized for casual games and apps. So depending on the apps you use on your test or the games, you are going to be able to make a phone win over the other and vice versa. And I say this because the way that I measure battery life when I have phones to compare is based on my day-to-day usage. Every single app combined throughout time to get a proper understanding of how good a phone is when it comes to battery life. And in practical terms, I have not noticed a difference between these two phones. They are both really, really good. Now, that being said, the main factor that makes people choose one phone over the other most of the time is the operative system. iOS versus Android, the lifelong debate. Which one is better? Well, I'm not going to answer that debate in this video, of course. It is very subjective. But I have a lot of things to say because both of these phones have the latest and greatest operative system available for them. In the case of the iPhone, it is iOS 18. And for the S24, it is Android 14, about to be 15, with One UI 6.1. Now, the first thing that I've noticed when comparing these two phones is that they both feel as stable, as fast, as reliable as each other. A lot of people seem to believe that Apple is more optimized and it works better, but that is at least no longer the case. The S24 feels very, very smooth, very stable. It hasn't crashed on me once. It hasn't felt laggy or buggy ever in the last 8 months. And based on my experience with other older Samsung phones, I can tell you this is going to be the case for a long time. Another big difference is that Samsung has included AI features, as you can see in this little blue button right here, AI features all across their apps in their phones. So you can do things like the very famous delete the object from the picture by touching a button functionality we've seen in pretty much every phone's presentation in the past 12 months. But you cannot get any of these features on the iPhone. I mean, you will be able to eventually, across the next couple months or years, in some countries and some phones, Apple will be unveiling some of these features that we can already enjoy, as you can see, on Samsung. Well, not only Samsung phones, pretty much, once again, pretty much every other phone that is not an iPhone. And I think this is probably the main disadvantage if you want to get one of these two right now. The iPhone will eventually, yes, get AI features, but it doesn't have them yet. And even then, they are not going to come all at once. Apple is going to slowly introduce these features across the next year, which is weird. I mean, why not include them all at the same time like every other brand did? It is Apple. Apple is Apple, and they do things the Apple way. But anyways, that being said, let's talk about the second most important deciding factor between these two phones, which are the cameras. When it comes to the iPhone, we have a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera and a 48 megapixel main sensor. And when it comes to the S24, we get a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 50 megapixel main sensor, and a 10 megapixel 3x telephoto. Now, when it comes to ultra-wide pictures and main camera pictures, I'm going to be completely honest. There is not a noticeable difference between the two phones. They have very similar sensors and very similar optics, and they both have very premium software to process the images. So the only major changes you are going to see when switching from one to the other are the color science. Samsung usually has a little bit more bright and vibrant colors on their pictures, and Apple goes for a more natural look. Of course, that has nothing to do with the quality on the cameras. It has more to do with the processing, and you can always change it with a different filter or editing the picture after you took it. So it is not a big deal. Now, that being said, there are actually two very big differences between these two phones that are going to probably make you prefer one over the other. The iPhone has a feature that the S24 doesn't have, and the S24 has a feature that the iPhone doesn't have. Let's begin talking about the iPhone feature. In this case, it is a macro photo capability. The ultra-wide camera can get really close to objects and take pictures that otherwise would be impossible to take. It is almost like having a third dedicated macro camera for this specific type of photography. When you want to capture a lot of detail of a specific object, this can be incredibly useful. Or some other times you just feel like being a photographer, and trust me, you can get some insanely appealing and impressive results with a macro camera. As I said, the iPhone has this feature and the S24 doesn't. If you want to get it on Samsung, you would have to go for the S24 Ultra. But on the other hand, the S24, as I said earlier, has a 3x telephoto camera, which lets you also get closer to subjects, but not in the same way. In this case, you can actually get closer to the subject without having to physically get closer to the subject, which can prove incredibly useful if you're trying to take pictures of things you can't really get close to, like for example, a mouse on your backyard. As you can see, I took this very detailed picture of a mouse in my backyard thanks to having a 3x telephoto camera. Because I didn't really have to get close to the mouse, it didn't run away, so I could capture it in detail and with enough time to set the camera correctly and take a good looking picture. If I had to take the picture with a normal main camera or an ultra-wide camera, it would have literally been impossible because getting so close to the mouse, it would have run away and I couldn't have been able to take the picture. So it is actually really handy sometimes to have a telephoto camera on your phone. Now, the question, of course, is which one of these features is better? And I honestly cannot answer that question. I mean, I like both. The ideal scenario would be to have both features on my phone. So I'm going to let you decide. You, of course, have your own preferences, your own tastes. You maybe take pictures of animals in the forest and you want a 3x telephoto camera. That would be ideal in that scenario. Or maybe you want to take a lot of close-up pictures of textures of objects because you like to do it or because you have to do it. I don't know. You have your own preferences. You are the one that should choose between these two features. But I think they are both great. So yeah, they are both really good phones. I mean, as you saw throughout the video, there are some things where the iPhone is better, some other things where the S24 is better. It is really hard for me to pick a winner. I don't think I should pick a winner. I mean, that's a good idea for when there's a big difference between the two phones and there is a clear winner that has a better price and better features and it's obvious. But in this case, I mean, I think they are both really good phones and each shines in its own thing. So I think, once again, I think it should be you deciding. And as I said earlier, you have both phones with incredible prices on Amazon. I left a link down below in the description. And now that the video is about to end, I recommend you go take a look.